Master the business of speaking with your hosts, Taylor and Austin. You're listening to Technically Speaking.
Welcome to another episode of Technically Speaking. We're your hosts, Taylor and Austin, and today's episode, we are talking about humor, even if you proclaim to not be funny, and how we can use it to better our results, aka make more money. To help with this, we have brought in Andrew Tarvin. Andrew is the world's first humor engineer teaching people how to get better results while having more fun. He's helped thousands of people across clients like GE, Procter & Gamble, and Microsoft. He's a best-selling author and has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, TEDx, and has done presentations in 50 states, 18 countries, and 3 continents. He also loves the color orange, especially if you check out his website, and he's obsessed with chocolate. So Andrew is going to share with us how humor can better our businesses, and he also drops 5 puns throughout the episode. So as you're listening, let's see if you can find them. As always, stick around until the end for some awesome resources, and we hope you enjoy this one.
Okay, we are live. Andrew, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. It is an honor to be here. I'm excited to chat with the two of you.
Oh man, we're excited too. Not only are you just a wonderful human being, but I also love the topic of humor, and I feel like it's something that I could improve upon.
Certainly.
So I'm excited to learn today from you.
Well, hopefully, I think the goal will be that we'll have some fun. We'll hopefully learn a little bit, and I will probably share at least one pun. So I'm going to give a fair warning to anyone listening now that there's going to be at least one pun coming your way.
And
Okay.
that is pun intended. So,
Yes.
we'll put that
Right.
warning on the label.
Look, I'm kind of thinking that this is less of a warning and more of a promise. So I'm
Exactly.
expecting the pun now. Andrew. Don't disappoint
Exactly.
me.
Well, no, you have to do wordplay because it's a pun thing to do. It's just wonderful.
Oh, there it is.
Getting started hot, you guys. So, okay, you're just such a cool person. And I will never forget the first time that I was looking at the Humor That Works website and I landed on the About page, as you do when you're looking into somebody. And we talked about this, I think, when we first met, but I saw that line about you being R2-D2 if you were a Star Wars character. And I laughed to the point where I almost cried. Like, it was so funny. And I think it speaks to you, but also why R2-D2? Like, he's the most inconspicuous character. He's got a huge personality, obviously, but that's just not the one that would come to mind for most people, I don't think.
Right. Well, and I think it is. First of all, it's a very scientific result because I did a BuzzFeed quiz to tell me that. So that's
right.
not just me picking it. This is pure science.
That's
out there.
serendipity, yeah.
Exactly. That's saying it. 2, I think it is appropriate in some ways because R2-D2 is the glue that keeps a lot of that stuff together, but subtly behind the scenes, the one that has a code that sends a message, etc. And I think that's how sometimes I am. I'm more of an introvert, so sometimes a little bit more behind the scenes. And then the most important part that I've realized now is that technically I can be R-Drew-D-Drew.
Oh, wow.
Okay,
Dang.
laying it in thick already. Here we go. That's number 2, I think.
That's perfect.
So this whole idea, the Humor That Works, like, why is this the brand? Where did this come from?
So this came from, I was working at Procter & Gamble. So short background, I have a degree in computer science and engineering from The Ohio State University. And you have to say otherwise they take away the degree. And started working at Procter & Gamble as an IT project manager and realized that humor was helping me be more effective because as a computer science engineer, always really good with computers, less good with humans. And I needed something to kind of build that skill set. And I started doing improv and stand-up in college and realized improv and stand-up was helping me. So I proclaimed myself the corporate humorist of P&G, started blogging about it, got business cards, kind of assumed someone would stop me, at P&G and be like, hey, you can't just create your own job title. But no one ever did. Instead, people kind of referred to me as the corporate humorist. They enjoyed the meetings and all that, got better results. And eventually I was like, okay, if this is working internally with a bunch of really smart people at P&G, there might be other people external to P&G that this could benefit from. And that's initially where it started. It was just a blog. I like the name Humor That Works because it's kind of a little bit of a double meaning in the sense of humor that is actually effective and humor in the workplace. And also humoratwork.com was already taken, but humoratworks.com was not. So I could register the domain. And that's where it all kind of sprang from.
Yeah, I love that. It's like some people get tattoos because they like the design and then they apply a meaning to it afterwards. So I'm not saying that's what happened here, but maybe elements of that, like the domain happened. Like, oh no, that's what I meant in the first place.
Exactly. I
That's
meant
what I
that
was
the
going
whole
for.
time. That's
Sure.
humor that works is way better than humor at work. And it's what I wanted from the very beginning, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, action oriented. I'm a fan. I'm like, is there a contradictory point of view here? Is there humor that doesn't work?
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's the number one people like the question that people get from me, especially like when, as a speaker, you speak to a lot of different groups and um I have the benefit or for whatever reason I'm very fortunate to a lot of the groups that I speak to are not the stereotypical like it's not Google and Southwest necessarily where you're like, "Oh, they're already a fun culture, they're going to bring you in." It's like, "No, it's the FBI, it is the UN, it is emergency first responders." It's like, so some of those groups, and a lot of times the feedback that I get from senior leaders is this worry of like, you can't say humor anymore because we're in a too PC culture. People are too sensitive these days, and so inappropriate humor is definitely is humor that doesn't work. And so part of the skill of humor is knowing what is appropriate, what's not, and how you adapt to it. And so that's part of what we train on. It's not just the idea that humor is good. Most people are on board with that, but then how do you actually do it well?
Gotcha. So what can you share some of that science with us? Like how do we do humor well? What do you have a methodology to this?
It's a great question. There's a couple things, and I love the framing of methodology because some people are like, "Do you have a formula?" And humor is partially predicated on the idea of surprise, and so if there
Mm,
was a formula for funny, it would inherently become obsolete.
right.
Right? Because it would become expected, it would become known. The closest you get to it is
Mm,
something kind of like a comic triple, right? So we can say that there's an art and science to humor. We can teach you the science part, and then part of our programs is about learning the art. And so you might learn something like a comic triple, and then that can kind of help. But if you then were to only use that, that would become a little bit too old or not work anymore. And so a framework or methodology is a great way to frame that. And one of the probably the bigger frameworks that we think there's two. One is around unlocking your natural humor persona. And as
mm.
part of that, when thinking about the humor to use, is then using what we call the humor map.
Gotcha. And are there multiple like personas out there for humor then? Like, and then we have to identify that. And then how what is the humor map then? Is that like the process you walk through to develop the humor? Can you share more info on that?
Sure, absolutely. And so yeah, the idea is that people have just like we have a different humor like regular personalities, right? If you know your personality assessments, I am a type A blue square conscientious INTJ with the sign of Aquarius, right? Which means that I am a
There's a
stubborn, ambitious
surprise.
introvert who likes long walks on the beach by myself. I'm also R2D2. I am, I know pretty much all of these different assessments. So just as we have different personalities, we have different ways that we show up when it comes to our humor. And if humor is a skill, it means it can be learned, which means the question then isn't, are you funny? The question is, what
Mm,
kind of funny are you? And so we think that there's 7 primary humor personas that people kind of adopt. And then based on that persona, that's going to show up differently when you're talking one-on-one with the client versus when you are following up after an event versus what you say on the stage versus what you say when you're in the event itself and someone asks you a question, etc. Like the personas are very intentionally not personality types. They're not set in stone. There's one that you probably naturally gravitate towards a little bit more, but then you're going to be able to, the people that are good are able to adapt to all of these different personas depending on the context or the moment or kind of what's needed.
Okay.
gotcha.
So this is so helpful for so
Wow.
many reasons. Like, first of all, I love that like applying a label to anything makes it instantly more practical because it contextualizes the things that you might be doing without even thinking about it, or maybe things that you want to improve upon that you're naturally gifted at but haven't really had a box for. So I like that. And I would love to be able to unpack all of those 7 personas, although I imagine we probably need a lot more than a half hour to do that. So
Yeah.
maybe you can give us like an example. Like this is a challenge for you. Okay. So I'm putting you on the spot here, but like I'm thinking of funny people that I can, like Ryan Reynolds. I don't know what it is about his humor that just makes me laugh so hard. He's just one of the funniest people I can think of. So could you tell us about what maybe a persona like his would look like and maybe some of the characteristics that go along with it?
Yeah, certainly. So there's 7 primary human personas, very, very high level just by name. You can kind of start to imply what they are. They are enthusiast, curator, inventor, entertainer, engineer, advocate, or skeptic. So skeptic is the easy one. It's the people who like doubt the benefit of humor. They're the serious person. They're the people that are like, work is supposed to feel like work, and I'm gonna wipe that smirk off your face or whatever, right? They're the people that are like out there. So we're not gonna ignore that. Then the entertainers is kind of what Ryan Reynolds most like default is in some ways, because he's just a great performer. The way that he delivers material as an actor, etc., the way that he is as Deadpool is what brings that character to life, is that performance. And that's what we as natural speakers are, is a lot of times our humor is the entertainment piece. But what's really interesting is that Ryan Reynolds also has a great component when it comes to an engineer. If you look at what he's doing for Aviation Gin, or what he's doing with his marketing company, where they're effectively using humor, it is very much about how do we use humor to sell a product, or how do we use humor to, do product placement in a tongue-in-cheek ways. And that's an engineer. So an engineer is someone who is using humor to solve a specific problem. And that's actually where the map comes into play. Whereas a speaker, you might say, oh, I had this one client, they reached out, they're really interested, and it's been a week and I haven't heard anything from them. Okay, can I use humor as a way to somehow bring that conversation back to the fold? And you can say, okay, that's the initial thinking as the engineer. How do I get someone to come back? And then you might say, okay, well, I can adapt the curator persona. So the curator is someone who finds funny stuff out there, but they don't necessarily have to create it. So let's say they see a very funny commercial that Ryan Reynolds is in, and it makes them think of that client for whatever reason, because maybe they're in the same space, or maybe they had talked about it. Or now, if I wanted to get your attention for whatever reason, Austin, and we haven't talked in a while, and I know you're super busy, next week I might send you an email and be like, hey, Austin, I just saw this great video from Ryan Reynolds. Not sure if you've checked it out, but it made me laugh. I send a link to that video, and then I might say, hey, by the way, if you have a chance, let's try to connect next week. So now I've sent something that is funny, a Ryan Reynolds video, that I didn't create. I didn't have to like get his permission, because it's a link to publicly something out there. And now you receive that, and the first thing you receive isn't feeling bad because you haven't responded. It's a positive light moment in your day. And I'm like, oh, this is fun. Maybe I should respond to Drew. Maybe I should get back to him.
Yeah. Wow. I love this conversation for a couple of reasons, but mainly because you said that like humor can often be used in like the engineer type. How can we use this to like, do product placement better? Well, Ryan, I think it was Ryan Reynolds. I might be completely wrong about this now that I'm thinking about it. I could be wrong, but it's Mint. I think he just bought a phone company.
That's him.
Yeah. Right. Okay, great. Yeah. He just bought a phone company. So I saw an ad on YouTube, and like, he was like, so this business is basically going to suck because I'm running it. Oh, it actually won't. And it was basically using that engineered humor to do that product placement for Mint. So like, it was a real world example you just shared with us to explain that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and by explaining what other people do, that's part of the curator. And so as for the speakers listening, you can start to say like, oh, I do a little bit of that. I do a little bit of that. And that's what we mean by this persona, is you're going to adapt. Even the first persona is that of the enthusiast. And this is someone who just appreciates humor. And it's something that Austin is doing very well right now. While I'm talking, he's nodding his head, he's smiling a little bit, he's laughing, etc. And same thing for you as well, Taylor. It's just his is more crystal clear. That video, it's bigger there. But that's an example of being positive, right? Showing that like, oh, I feel good about what I'm saying because someone is now smiling to me. So if you're in a virtual call with a client, you want to have your video on, you want to be engaged, because they're going to feel good about that call, because like, oh, I made that person smile or laugh. So even something as simple where you're not even saying a punchline, you're just smiling or laughing a little bit more, is another example of how to effectively use humor in your day-to-day work.
Yeah, man, it's so approachable. What an approachable way to look at humor too. People are I think maybe a little scared of it sometimes
Mhm.
too. Like I feel that
Yeah.
way sometimes, like because it sets yourself up for embarrassment. Nothing's worse than making a joke that nobody laughs at, you know. And like actually, I think that
Vulnerable.
might even segue into like another question for you, Drew. Like, there's a lot of people out there that would just say, "I'm not funny," just flat out, right? And maybe some of it comes from fear, but from your angle, being the humor expert, why do you think that is? And is that actually true?
Well, I think it is. I think the fear of it comes from, for whatever reason, we conflate humor with comedy, right? When we think of humor, we immediately think of people who are funny. And so that part of it is understanding that humor is a broader definition. It's very intentional why I talk about humor in the workplace and not comedy in the workplace, because comedy can be very difficult. They think of, oh, I got to stand on stage and tell jokes. And it's interesting talking with speakers because I've taken a number of speakers to do their first stand-up show, and it terrifies them. They've spoken on stages all around the world to audiences of thousands of people. And then we go into a basement open mic in New York City, and suddenly they're like, I don't know if I can go on. I don't know if I can do this. And it's so people are intimidated by that level, what they think that's what it means. But it's interesting because it's like, oh, that would mean like, oh, I'm never gonna go for a run because I'm not a marathon runner. Or, and I'm not going to pick up the guitar to practice to play because I'm never going to become Jimi Hendrix. It's like, no, you don't compare yourself to the top. Like there's a lot of layers in between where there's still a lot of value. So I think that's part of it. And I think people are worried about the awkwardness. And there's two things I would say to that. One is that a lot of times humor that isn't effective usually is only awkward if you make it awkward. Like if I tell you a terrible joke, let's think of a terrible joke. We'll get another pun in here. So a man once asked me if I wanted some free fish. So I asked, what's the catch? Right? What's the catch? But no, because it's a double entendre. It's a catch because it's a catch of this, and it's a catch 22, and it's kind of a like if I try to explain it, if I sit there in the awkwardness, it becomes a little bit more awkward. But if my humor is positive and inclusive, and I say a positive inclusive joke that no one laughs at, now it's just a positive inclusive statement, right? I could say, a man once asked me if I wanted some free fish, and he asked, what's the catch? So it didn't work out in that scenario, but I'm going to keep on going on, right? Like you almost don't even notice that it was an attempt at a joke. It's only if I pause to make it awkward. And then the last thing, if we want, we can talk a little bit about this idea because it's kind of big within the news of like cancel culture. I can't use humor because people are too sensitive and that kind of stuff. And so I think that sometimes worries people.
Yeah, I would love to dive more into that topic because I can almost hear it in my head already. Like there are some like this thing about like speakers, coaches, consultants. We're in this professional world, right? And so like we think of using humor, and we're like, oh, my audience, there's no way that like this is gonna work. I think that can be a default setting, and I think some of it can be fear around this idea of using humor in an improper way. Can you speak more to that?
Certainly. Well, I think, first of all, we have to be honest. We have to say, like, I don't want to sugarcoat it or pretend like that it doesn't exist. That it is a very real risk, especially as a speaker in a corporate audience, because in some ways you have to play to the most conservative person in the room. I don't mean that politically. I mean in terms of their level of humor, because you might make 99% of the room laugh. If you got an audience of 100 people, you might make 99 people fall out of the chairs laughing. But if one person is offended by it, and that person either is a senior leader, the person bringing you in, or is someone in HR, or someone that then goes to HR, that entire thing can come down. A lot of times I've heard from clients who are like, we were told we can never hire another comedian, but we saw your TEDx talk and we can frame you as not a comedian. It's like, yes, I'm an engineer first. Don't even frame me as a comedian. I just am an engineer who talks about humor. So there is certainly this risk, this fear about it. I think one, to completely throw humor out as a skill because it can be used in poor ways is to say, I'm never going to talk because I might fumble a word or something that I might say, or I'm not going to use a CRM because I might forget to jump into it one day. So I might as well never use it. Well, you all know, like, no, it's practice, it's repetition, it's changing, it's improving. And so the people who tell me that they're like, oh, I'm not going to use humor because people are too sensitive or cancel culture, to me, what I hear is either I am not skillful enough in my humor to adapt to changing times. I'm too lazy to try, or I'm so prejudiced that I can't get past that and move to humor that is appropriate to other people. And so part of it is learning what is appropriate. And the last thing that I'll say, just kind of very high level, is that there's typically 3 reasons why humor is inappropriate when there is a risk. It's either an inappropriate target, an inappropriate topic, or it comes at an inappropriate time. So if you're poking fun at something, that's where we talk about it, like you don't want to punch down. So that means it's an inappropriate target. Inappropriate topic, just because you're using humor doesn't mean it's okay for you to then talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll and other things that you would maybe not talk about in a workplace. And then inappropriate time, yeah, if you just fired someone, or if someone just went through a big layoff and then you come in and like, let's talk about all the fun stuff. And the audience is sitting there, they're like, how can you possibly talk about humor when we just laid off half of my friends? It's like understanding the right moment for it.
Yeah. So look, there's obviously pitfalls here, right? But I also think like situationally, sometimes making a joke when things are dark can be the thing that reignites the spirit, and
Coping
that also
mechanism
seems like a
almost.
really fine line to be walking. So like, do you have guidelines for yourself in place that allows you to sort of poke down paths that maybe seem like they're kind of teetering on the fence there, but in a way that really does end up being a positive experience for everybody?
Well, I think it's important to recognize exactly what you said. So there is, in comedy, there's this idea that comedy equals tragedy plus time, right? With the intent of that being that if something tragic happens, after enough time has elapsed, you can find the comedy in it, right? This is why we're allowed to make jokes about the Titanic sinking, but it still feels very too soon for a lot of people with 9/11. Right, because both are tragedy. Both are, a lot of people died in in terrible, tragic ways. But because enough time has elapsed, or like we're now to the point, like we can make jokes about Abraham Lincoln, and that, but not something else, right? So enough time has elapsed. That's true for ourselves as well, individually. Of like, I can laugh about how I was in high school, about me being the very nerdy person, and I don't know if you all ever did the spike tips with blonde hair, all that. Yep. Had that. I had a stud earring at one point.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
I had a stud earring and Harry Potter glasses, which I realize is basically the mullet of facial accessories, right? Because it's like, I'm all business here, but I'm party right here.
Yeah.
I can laugh about that now. That was tragic when it was happening, right? So enough time passes, you get comedy. What I've realized, though, is when something tragic happens, if you can find the comedy in it, it will make it feel like more time has elapsed. It almost gives you more perspective. So exactly to your point, in tragic times, really important for us to be able to find that sense of humor. But how do you then do it well? Well, part of it, going back to this idea of the map stands for your medium, audience, and purpose. And so audience is really, really key. Not only is it, what does the other person need? What does that person know? What do they expect? But also, what is your relationship with them? I would imagine the humor that the two of you use with each other might be very different than with a client that you're meeting for the very first time, because your relationship is different. Because oh, hey, I know Austin kind of likes this type of humor. Taylor kind of likes this kind of humor. But this client, I'm not exactly sure of. So I need to be the safest with that humor. And then over time, I'm going to learn it a little bit more, and it might refine or it might change. And so I think that's part of it. And also coming from a place of good intent. I think that for the most part, most people, if you say something that it does bother them or irk them, if they know it's coming from a place of good intent, that it was just like, not that it was just a joke, but that you meant it in a positive way, I think people will often give that grace. A lot of times, the things that you see in the news of where people are like, oh, this person needs to be canceled, is a lot of times they show zero remorse for anything that they said or did.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. What's I think on a lot of people's mind, or at least my mind, just having this conversation about humor, especially like in the context of like running a business, growing a business, like how do we like incorporate humor not only just into the workplace, but into our marketing, into our sales? Like, how have you found humor to be successful in actually growing a business? And have you found it to be not as impactful for the business in any scenarios?
I mean, I think it's incredibly vital. Like, if you look at the type of posts that often get shared or reblogged, etc., it is either something so poignant it's never been said before, or it's funny.
Yeah.
And something so poignant, that's a great bar to go after, but really, really hard. Much easier for me to make a pun. Much easier for me to let's get to number 4. Much easier for me to say, I think the secret to being a good ghost is to act super natural.
Wow. Is that number
Easy.
4 for the show?
That was number 4 for the show.
Delivering
Gotta
on
keep track.
promises, Drew. Thank you for that.
Then exactly, you gotta set the stage and then over deliver. That's easier to share than it is to like, here's this thing that's going to completely blow your mind. And you can do a little bit of both, but humor absolutely helps with that process. And it's actually the way that I'll frame it is this, Taylor, and actually both of you can answer this question. It's a very dumb question, but a very important question. And the dumb question is, would you rather do something that is fun or not fun?
Fun.
Okay, so Taylor says fun.
Yeah.
Austin, you on fun? Yeah, people
It was a
listening, you're
little
like,
bit of a
fun.
tough decision,
Fun,
but
yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's what I landed on.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. As long as it doesn't cost too much money or end up with me in prison or anything like that, you're like, oh, I'm going to go fun. Well, that's exactly true. So then if you're to make your marketing a little bit more fun, would people be more likely to engage with it? If you're to make your emails out to people a little bit more fun, would they be more likely to respond? If you were to make your programs a little bit more fun, would you get more interest, engagement, spin, etc.? And the answer, the research around all of it says yes, right? That's where humor can help, because it's not only, and this is where being the engineer is very important, where it's not just humor for the sake of humor. It's not like, well, okay, so I listened to this podcast, so I'm supposed to start with a joke. So I'm going to read a joke off of the internet. I'm going to find something. Let's see, I was sending something to some HR people today. And so I said, you can't actually spell humor without HR, because then it would just be UMO. Right?
Good joke.
So I think it's a good joke. Right? I actually got that from my mom, who spent her career in HR. But it's not like you listening to that be like, okay, I'm going to reach out to Sherm now, and I'm just going to start with that line, and then everything else below it is going to be boring. Right? It's not just that. It's not just. It's like, okay, how does this actually help me to do the thing that I already wanted to do? Maybe you use that to capture attention, and then that leads into something else. Or maybe you use a metaphor so that you can explain something that's pretty complex in an easier way. Like, hey, a speaker CRM is exactly like blank, right? And you make it more engaging, make it more interesting. And so I think that connection is really important. Is also, it comes back to the why. Comes back to why are you actually doing this thing?
Yeah. Are you ever surprised by people's reaction to some of this stuff? Like when you first started going down this path, were you thinking that this was going to be embraced? Did you think that people were going to be skeptical of it? Because I'm hearing everything that you say, and like it's very logical, but I question how often that it's actually applied.
It is a great question, and I'll say humor is very interesting as a topic. So if we talk about the marketing of this, when people ask me kind of like, what would you do differently? I don't know that I would have branded what I do around humor. I probably wouldn't have called the company Humor That Works. I probably would have because there's something nice about saying, I speak about employee engagement and then showing up and being really funny, because you're breaking expectations. As soon as humor is part of the conversation, it does two things. One, it raises the bar for how funny the program has to be, because now they're like, even if it's like, we're going to talk about humor and depression, people are like, this is good. This better be a funny talk about depression, just because the word humor is in the title.
Yeah.
And so it raises the bar of what needs to be funny. You have to have more punchline stories, etc., and part of it. But at the same time, interestingly enough, in some ways, it lowers the perceived status of what you're going to talk about. People are then like, okay, this is a nice to have, but what I really need is leadership training. Or we're seeing this a lot of like, humor is kind of interesting, but we really need to do stress management. It's like, oh no, humor can help with stress management. Or we're trying to create psychological safety. It's like, well, humor is a great litmus test for your organization, for the company culture. And so a big part of it is making sure that I make that connection. So no one hates humor, but no one is searching for it. There's like maybe 1,000 global monthly searches for the phrase humor in the workplace, but people are looking for an engaging speaker. They're looking for employee engagement or communication skills or creative thinking, all of which humor can help. So a big part of any brand or any marketing is being sure of how you connect what you do to what problem you're actually solving. And so that's the key for us, is making sure that we're connecting it back to that solving the problem. That's when people are like, okay, now I'm on board with this.
Yeah, because humor is a vehicle, right? Like it's
Right.
just it's a tool. It's a tool that we can use to achieve whatever else it is that we want to achieve. So
Exactly. And that's
makes
that's
sense.
part of the intent for people to take away is it's not meant to be that you have to make every saying entertaining. I'm kind of tongue in cheek adding puns through as we go through because I just think they're fun and that was out of the promise. I'm not saying every time you do it, oh, I would need to incorporate humor, so I need to share a pun every single time I do it. Like that's not
That's not the
necessarily
takeaway
what I'm
here.
talking about. Yeah, that's not the takeaway. Could be a takeaway. I'd be okay with that. I think the next person that you have on should have a pun as well. You should give them that challenge of like, what's the joke that you like?
Okay, deal.
But the intent, it goes back to that intent piece, and to say that it is just a tool,
Yeah.
right? Doesn't mean that it's the only tool that you use, but it's another one in your tool belt as a speaker, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur to help you do your work more effectively.
Yeah. Oh man, this is gold. So we've been talking a lot about like how we can use humor. I don't know if the right word is externally, like in our marketing copy, in our relationships, in our, so on. Like, how can we use humor like more internally, like when we're in the weeds and things are tough? Like, have you found that the same frameworks apply just to yourself, or?
Absolutely. So the map still applies, and that I think is the helpful thing. If you want to be of the personas, if you want to be an engineer, the map is what comes into play, and it helps you to do the other ones as well. But it's basically like, okay, what is the medium, the scenario? So yeah, if you're okay, my medium is I'm speaking to the audience. That's a little bit different. Versus the medium is me in my own head, right? The audience is me, and maybe the purpose is I want to make emails a little bit more fun. So one of the things that I'll do is when I'm reading emails, I'll start to read each of the emails in a different accent in my head. Like, okay, like what if Austin sounded like Incredible the Hulk, or the Incredible Hulk, or what if this was R2D2 and it's me just beeping to myself as I read through the lines?
I like how he changes his tone to the actual
Right? Yeah, like
beeping
beep
of
beep
our.
beep 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 beep. Yeah. P.S. I need to reply. Right, but that's just a way of playing my work, of trying to make it a little bit more fun. Or one of the easiest things people can do is kind of combining that enthusiast and curator thing. Is just like if you're feeling stressed out, take a laughter break. If you know, like I love like the work that I do, but I know that, hey, as a podcast, this is a little draining for me. Me talking with other people, me doing client calls is sometimes draining. And so I'm intentionally like, okay, how do I make sure I have 5 minutes that I can go on Reddit real quick, or I can go and see my daughter and, give her a hug, or whatever this small thing is that's going to bring me joy. How can I be intentional that I'm relieving stress throughout the day? And that's a simple way. Like, again, this is an excuse to like, this is your prescription to go on Instagram solely if you are following people who inspire you, who make you laugh. If you're going to go on there and it's going to make you upset because you see all the news, or because, you're going to see terrible lies or whatever else is out there, one, change your social media feed and then go back to it.
Nice.
Man,
What a golden nugget.
the world would be a much better place if we were all focused on things that just made us laugh as opposed to things that make us angry.
Yeah.
Because it's a strong human emotion,
is.
laughter, humor, it is. And honestly, like I think that's a good reminder to have. Like things get tough and we face challenges as business owners, as human beings, right? But laughter is a pretty strong antidote to a lot of those negative feelings. Like I know for me, like I love stand-up comedy. We have Dry Bar Comedy here in Utah, and I'm a big fan of their YouTube channel and stuff. And like I just know that no matter how crappy of a day it is, like I can go watch a 3 or 4 or 5 minute stand-up bit, and it just totally improves my mood, makes me better with other people. It gets me out of my funk. Like, yeah, it's such a cool thing. I just love how comedy improves the world and humor as a whole. I'm glad you made that differentiation for me, by the way.
Yeah. Well, and you're exactly right. And I think especially as speakers, it's a double whammy because it's research. Like go and watch Hannah Gadsby and see how she in the Nanette special captures an audience and does comedy for 20 minutes and then brings the room incredibly far down to make a point, and then brings him back and takes him on this roller coaster. Like look at look at Tig Notaro and some of the specials that she's done, or Ali Wong and how she uses the stage, or Chris Rock and how he delivers a story. Like any of these comedians, like it's also research to say, can I do those components as well? This is that entertainer component, but how as a speaker, can I incorporate this? Or you can also just do it, I just need to laugh. So let me go laugh. One of my favorite subreddits is contagious laughter. Right? You just go on there and it's people like, here's a video of someone who gets, for whatever reason, into a fit of laughter. And there's something just so joyous about their laughter that you start laughing as well. It's that like wholesome memes or made me smile. Like there's a lot of positive things out there if you know how to seek for it. And it's a great break throughout the day.
Yeah.
Wow.
Shout out to Reddit. Thank
Shout
you
out to
for
Reddit.
curating so many funny things.
Yeah. Well, man, what an episode. Drew, thank you so much for coming on. As you know, you've provided a tremendous amount of value, but what are some of the things you're working on right now that our listeners can benefit from?
Well, right now, mentally in my head, I'm trying to work on a fifth pun so that we can write,
Really
so
wrap
that
this up.
we can end on that.
Yeah.
So I'll try to wrap on that while I also wrap up. Maybe more helpful. What I'm really excited about is this idea of the persona stuff. This is relatively new research that we're doing, that we're building out. And so we have a completely free assessment. In fact, we have one set up for humor.me/speakerflow. So just go to humor.me/speakerflow. Take a free 2-minute assessment to help you understand what is your primary persona, because you can adapt all of them, but sometimes starting with the one that comes most natural to you is an easy starting point to getting into using humor. And then from there, you can expand. So just go to humor.me/speakerflow. Check that out. A bunch of free resources on the site and things like that as well. And speaking of websites, I did once, I thought about starting an optometrist business, and it was going to be called A Sight for Sore Eyes.
There it is.
Goodness.
Number 5, man.
There
Way
it
to land the
is.
plane.
Number
funny.
5.
Good job.
Well, Drew, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. This has been awesome. Hey, listen, if you like this episode, don't forget to rate it, like it, subscribe to it. If you want more awesome resources like this, go to speakerflow.com/resources. Thank you so much for chiming in. I just wanted to take a second to thank our sponsor, Auxbus. Auxbus is the all-in-one suite of tools you need to run your podcast. And it's actually what we run here at Speakerflow for Technically Speaking. It makes planning podcasts simple. It makes recording podcasts simple. It even makes publishing podcasts to the masses simple. And quite honestly, Technically Speaking wouldn't be up as soon as it is without Auxbus. Thank you so much, Auxbus. And if you are interested in checking Auxbus out, whether you're starting a podcast or you have one currently, get our special offer, auxbus.com/speakerflow, or click the link below in our show notes.
Thanks for tuning in today. Check the show notes for more info and see you next time. Later.